Hey everybody, hopefully you all had a really great Memorial Day. Just wanted to say a big thank you to all the troops, all the fallen heroes, everybody who's ever served in the armed forces in this country, and let us be here today. A big shout out to those guys. Hopefully everybody had a great Memorial Day weekend. Uh, Missed you guys last week. Actually, over the last couple of weeks, there hasn't been a whole lot going on in the city. I think with the Memorial Day holiday and whatnot, it's been very quiet. The meeting we had tonight was extreme, very little. There were no ordinances that passed, no resolutions, nothing like that. Um, there was pretty much just there was an award that went out to somebody who worked with the city in Parks and Rec for 38 years, and there was basically just us passing a lot of permits and stuff for businesses that applied. Which one of the things that I'd like to say is interesting and unique about Chippewa Falls is that in a lot of cities, even things like that, you'll have people from town that can speak whenever they want for as long as they want, which sounds great in practice in theory, but you can have meetings that run for 4 hours where there's nothing but bickering and arguing. And I would say our mayor, Greg Hoffman, does a really good job at having sort of a structure with our meetings where people can speak and they can bring issues forward, but we only focus on things that are important in the tasks on hand. We don't have we don't have meetings that devolve into senseless bickering, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think we have some meetings that end up being on the surface, that was quick, not much home to write about, because we have structure in our meetings. It's a good thing. So a lot of towns don't have that. Um, so yeah, I mean, not really much to talk about on that front. One of the committees, I believe it was Committee 3. They spoke about they met with the townships to discuss further, basically the funding for our contract. We do our fire and ambulance services with them, and the townships basically came back and said, look, you can increase what we pay by $3.87, something in that neighborhood, for 7 years. That's consistent with inflation. That's what we can do. So we have a lot to think about with that, because again, they're getting a heck of a deal. At the same time, we need that revenue for our fire department. So it's definitely a lot to think about. Once budget time comes up, learning how the budget works is going to be very important for me, because I mean that's going to be when that negotiation comes to its head. That's that's going to be a pretty big deal. I've certainly talked about it on this channel before. Um, and the more information I have on that, the more I understand how that works and what the consequences are of, because there's many directions we could go. We can either continue negotiating with them. We can seek several outcomes from that negotiation, or we could kick them to the curb. That's certainly a possibility, and I want to understand what the ramifications of every scenario look like, certainly before it's time to cast votes on this stuff. It's going to be a big deal. So, more drama there, I suppose. That's pretty much everything on the city front for now. One of the things I did want to talk about is Senate Bill 7 in Texas passed, or no, it didn't pass. Excuse me. A bunch of the Democrats in their state assembly walked out so that there wasn't a quorum, because the bill was expected to pass. And the governor came back and said, well, you guys aren't going to get paid then, which I'm not sure these people really care. But it is pretty amazing to watch, more or less the will of the people be undone by a minority like that, who is acting like spoiled brats. Now, the claim from both the media and the Democratic Party is that this bill is, extremely racist, and all the sort of buzzwords they use to describe anything that the Republicans try to do. So, just like with the Georgia bill, I went, well, let's see the truth, and I've started reading that bill. It's more than twice as long as the Georgia bill. It's about somewhere 220, 230 pages, so it's going to take me some time to read it. I'm only about 30 pages in thus far. I learned about it just this morning. Had a chance to read it briefly this afternoon, and that's about all as far as I've gotten. So far what I've seen in it is that there's very clear-cut guidelines set out to protect poll watchers, where basically the stuff that happened in cities like Philadelphia, where people were corralled 200 feet away from the booths they were supposed to be observing, where it very specifically is written into law now that it can't happen, assuming this bill eventually goes forward. Stuff like that. So far, I haven't seen a single thing that I would say is controversial or even political. There's a big divide. There's a big difference between government and politics. Government is what I would define as doing what you need to do to make sure your society, your city, your state, whatever functions. Politics is basically whatever you say or do to get people to let you keep doing that. And unfortunately, I do believe that with the case of these voting bills, I believe opposing them, from what I can see, it is entirely political and anti-government. It's anti-societal. That's the evidence I've seen so far. I have a video where I covered the Georgia bill and all of its highlights, and then we compared it to what the media was saying, and it was a disgrace. For those of you listening on Hometown Radio, that's on my podcast. So I'm the link to that YouTube channel is right here in the description. So I'd highly encourage you to check out the channel, subscribe to it, and I believe it's episode 5 is the video where I cover that. It's a bit of a doozy, but almost 2 hour long. But you get to see, what is actually in the bill and the good that it does for people. And then you get to see the media say the exact opposite and blatantly lie to you. And it's pretty damning stuff. And it's pretty sad that major media publications, they think you're so stupid that they can just outright lie to you. And unfortunately, this Texas bill, it's smelling the same so far, because everything the media said about it, I first heard about it from NPR, National Public Radio, and what's really concerning about NPR is, they're taxpayer funded. They're funded by tax dollars, yet they're, at this point, I would say they're openly partisan, and they're right on the bandwagon with blatantly lying. They did so with the Georgia bill, and as far as I'm getting the impression that they're doing the same with the Texas bill. By next week I will have read the whole thing, and we're definitely going to talk about it, similar to the Georgia bill. And I'll tell you this: if I do see something in there that I go, hey, that is pretty racist or pretty horrible, I'd be the first person to say something. If you can show me a policy that is racist, bad for people, discriminatory, I stand alongside you and fight it in a heartbeat. A good example is Lyndon Johnson's Great Society program. That's a pretty horrible set of programs that is responsible for all the racial issues that we see today. It's directly responsible for all of it. And, that's one that I would abolish and get rid of the, every way that it infects our society today, because it is hurting the people that it claims to be helping. That's something we'll talk about. I could make an entire 3-hour episode about that policy very easily. And it's one of those things where it got passed right after the civil rights movement was won. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 was passed, which It was obviously landmark legislation, and Great Society pretty much undoes it. Um, I could outline how it increases poverty amongst minorities, how it shortens lifespans amongst minorities, how it increases crime in the communities that it targets. I can show you how it targeted disproportionately the black community versus other communities, although it has hurt every racial group. It particularly hurt black families more than anyone else, and the reason why was because basically one of the things that Great Society did was it said, well, you can get a check from the government for every kid you have, but here's the catch: you cannot have a man in the household. You must be a single mother to get that check. Well, because of the way they wrote that, they basically incentivized single parent families, and we know today there's irrefutable data that a child risen in a single parent household is more than 20 times as likely to end up incarcerated at some point in their life. So if you pass a policy that disproportionately affects a group of people that is more likely to be in poverty, you're going to get an increased crime rate in that group. And, it's entirely the fault of a terrible policy that should be repealed. So, I digress. My point being, if this Texas bill turns out to be, what they say it is, I'll admit to that next week. So far, I don't think that's going to be the case. 30 pages in, and what do we got? We got them saying that every voting place will be monitored by video surveillance that is more or less accessible to the public. Well, that sounds like something that should be a thing. That every place where there's uncounted ballots or that there is ballot counting will be under video surveillance. Yeah, that should be a thing. That's good. You've got language in there talking about polling places will be open for 12 hours, but when the polls close, anybody that is in line waiting to vote will still be allowed to vote no matter how long it takes. That's a good thing. So far, nothing has jumped out at me saying like, oh, we're going to make it really hard for this person to vote. There's been some stuff in there like you can't say, well, I have to work today and use that as an excuse to get an absentee ballot because, and the reasoning behind that makes a lot of sense to me. Your employer can't punish you for going and voting. It's against the law. So that makes sense to me. I could see people jumping all over that and going, see, they're trying to stop the working. No, but there's dishonest people in our society that play that game all the time. And, unfortunately, what I'm finding is that tends to be, those people seem to work for the media more and more. And it's really disturbing that we live in a time where, you could go on Rumble and find a guy podcasting from his basement, and he's more likely to tell you the truth than a major media publication. That's not good. That means we don't have a free press. That means we don't have a press at all in this society. It's a big problem, and I think a lot of the bitterness, the partisan bitterness that we see in society is a direct result of that. When you have media that's basically letting one side off of the hook, they protect our current president 100%. They don't call him out on anything. You have to look to fringe or alternative media to get any kind of insight onto what Joe Biden is actually doing. That's despicable. It's, what that means is that particular political party, they're going to do whatever they want because they know they're going to be covered. So if nobody's there to hold them accountable, I mean, the whole point of having a free press is so that people involved in government and politics are held accountable. Well, if you have one party that is not held accountable at all in any respect, that can do literally whatever they want, and then you have another that is demonized even if they do good things, you have a pretty serious problem on your hands. You don't have much of a society at that point. You certainly aren't going to have people that have any idea what they're actually voting for or what's really going on in the world. You hear these buzzwords about, oh, we live in the era of misinformation. Well, from what I can tell, the misinformation is coming from the household names, which is, how the hell did that happen? What's going on with that? Why we have to come up with a way to address this, and I don't know the answer to that right now. You can't be, what do? You can't be like Stalin, shut the press down. Well, we know where that goes. You just exacerbate the existing issue of the fact that, instead of having one side not be held accountable, you'd have both sides not be held accountable. That wouldn't fix anything. But how do you, what do you do in a free society when you have a media and a culture that only wants to hold one side accountable and just let them do whatever they want? It's a free will problem. What do you do about that? I don't know the answer to that. I do know it's something that needs to be solved sooner rather than later, and that if we don't, that's basically what's green lighting a tyrannical government. And that's what we're getting very close to today. We have we have people talking seriously about, let's issue you a vaccine passport, and if you don't have it, you can't shop, you can't go to the grocery store, you can't go to work, you can't do anything. And then they try and play it off like, well, it's your choice, so you're still free. Well, no, if you're telling me I literally can't live, that I can't buy food to eat, that I can't earn a living, that's not a choice. That's being compelled through force. It's exactly what that is. I mean, luckily that's not on the table right now, but it's pretty scary that people are talking about that. I mean, especially now when you can see, all over the CDC, COVID cases are on the decline. So it's not like, people are acting like this is, like this is smallpox, like it's wiping out people coast to coast, when really we're at the tail end of something that it was ugly, it wasn't good, but to pretend that it's anywhere near as dangerous as, like, there was the plague of Athens 2,000 years ago. 25% of the people in Athens died. We're nowhere near that. If we had something like that in the United States, you'd be talking about 80 million corpses. Just to put that into perspective, that's obviously not what this is. So, and I mean, I think if you're an older individual, you should get the vaccine. I think if you're a younger individual, particularly if you've already had COVID, I'm not sure that it's really going to do you a whole lot of good. I haven't seen much reason to believe that it will. It's troubling to see that kind of stuff even being taken, seriously considered in this country. You still have education unions that are looking to keep schools closed into the next year. I mean, you have people that have been getting paid to do nothing. They're sitting there. You got these people going, well, I'm not going to work because it's not safe for me. And then they're posting pictures on social media of their vacation in Malibu that just never ends for a year. I mean, it's despicable. It's like, if you actually cared about this, you wouldn't be on vacation somewhere. You wouldn't be getting on a plane. Are you kidding me? Who are you trying to fool? I mean, right there, I'd say, well, I think you should go right back to work. So, well, let's check out CDC together right now, since we're talking about it. So I pulled up cdc.gov, and this is basically the the current data on COVID-19. What we're going to look at here. So I mean, the total cases in the United States that have been confirmed, via test and whatnot, 33 million. And there we have the death number. Tragic. What they're not telling you about this number is that the CDC, you can probably find an article on this somewhere, has said early on, not this last March, but the March before, the head of the CDC at that time, Dr. Robert Redfield, he had said that he believed there was anywhere from 6 to 12 times as many confirmed cases at that time as what had been confirmed. Now they're saying it's somewhere between 2 to 4 times as many. Rand Paul had a piece on this as well. He's been going around making speeches about this. I mean, he's a doctor himself. We got 296 million vaccines administered. That's almost the entire country has had one dose on average. And you have a bunch of people in the country that aren't going to take this thing. They're not going to touch it. So, I mean, that's an extraordinary number. Between that and total cases, if we take the 2 to 4 times estimate and we assume that it's true, you're looking at, anywhere, if you got 2 times as many people that had it and never knew it, you're looking at 100 million people, just shy of. If you got 4 times as many, well, you're looking at about 150, 160 million. That's half the country. So between that and your vaccines administered here, I mean, you're looking at, you're looking at pretty much both a combination of natural and vaccine herd immunity at this point, and I mean, you're seeing that corroborated in the cases in the U.S. over the last 30 days. I mean, we're trending way down here. Let's see if we can get the whole graph here. So I mean, this is April 13th of 2020. This is the beginning right here. Back when there was 39 new cases, way back in January. We shot up around March, April. I kind of remember that. This is around when I remember Trump saying we're going to have a week where there's a lot of deaths. A long time ago now he said that. And then we moved forward into the holiday season, and that was where this thing reached its apex. And you can see what's interesting is if you chart any epidemic in history that happens, it follows a bell curve pattern like this, where eventually it just goes up, comes right back down at about the same pace. Now we're kind of seeing that over here at the tail end of May. You compare this to about roughly this point around here somewhere. I mean, it's a little bit lower. We got vaccines in there, right? But I mean, ultimately, you can expect this thing to drag out probably to the end of the year. But when you look at the other side of this graph, we're already lower than this point here. New cases in about June, July last year was 58,000 a day. Now we're at 3,700 a day. I mean, we're really looking at we're getting close to sort of the end of this thing. I mean, it'll probably drag out close to the end of the year, but that doesn't mean that we're getting the daily infections that we kind of got adjusted to. It's very much like back in the beginning, where there's very, very few people still contracting this thing and passing away from it. And I mean, the difference between back then, March, April, nobody was immune to this thing yet. Now you have millions, hundreds of millions of people that are either vaccinated against it or immune to it naturally. So when you got people, my point on all this is when you got people in our society today talking about, I want vaccine passports so that I can micromanage people and take away their freedoms and not let them participate in society. I mean, the data here tells you that there's absolutely no justification for that. That's lunacy. That's people who either don't understand the data here or they don't care. Either way, those are people you shouldn't listen to. You look, percentage of adults with at least one vaccination, 62.8%. I mean, so you got 62, almost 63% of the society that is going to get that second dose. Right there, you're almost at artificial herd immunity. You throw in the natural herd immunity. I mean, that's it. This thing's going away. When we talk about the deaths, I mean, that's obviously not a very happy number. Nonetheless, we are definitely through the worst of it. Very obviously very sorry to anybody who was directly affected by this, who lost their life or know somebody who lost their life to this. It's very sad. The silver lining to that is, thank goodness this thing was very kind to children. This thing did not affect children very much. Thank goodness for that. Most illnesses are not that kind. Most illnesses are worse towards children, not better. That's the one good thing. I knew in my line of work, working in people's homes, that sooner or later I was going to bring this thing home. There was no getting around it. It was inevitable. And one thing that gave me peace of mind is that no matter what happened to me, I knew that my children, weren't going to catch this thing and die. I knew that the odds of children 5 years old and younger dying from COVID-19, I want to say it was somewhere around 3 out of 100,000. I mean, I think it's still under 100 people 5 years old and younger that ended up passing away from this thing, which, thank goodness for that, because a lot of kids got this thing. So, I could only imagine, what if it hadn't been that way. I was trying to load up the deaths chart here. It looks like it doesn't want to do that. So, I just kind of wanted to go over the numbers with you. People on the news certainly aren't doing this. They're not talking about this stuff. They'll highlight this number in red and show like a dishonest graph that's just going up and up and up and up, and be like, yeah, the end is nigh. And they've been fear mongering since the beginning, and it's been pretty disgusting. They didn't do a lot to help you actually deal with this thing and learn how to live with it while it was playing out. They were more interested in cooping you up in your house, making you think it was the apocalypse, when this thing is anything but. I remember at the beginning of this thing when they targeted that one hospital in New York, and were saying that it's like a scene out of an apocalypse, and bodies spilling out of the hospital into the streets, and they were implying that people weren't getting care that were coming in that were sick, and it was all BS. None of it was true. They made it sound like our hospitals were the same as a third world country, and that's our media. Those are the people who we trust to give us the news. So, this thing is coming to an end. Anybody at this point who is trying to pressure you, I got thrown out of Woodman's maybe a week and a half ago because I refused to wear the mask. being vaccinated and whatnot, and seeing this graph for what it is, it's like, well, what are we doing here? This is completely pointless. Needless to say, there was an employee there who was just itching to, go and suspend my transaction, and she was pretty much salivating at the mouth with the opportunity to just impose her will on somebody else, which is a pretty disgusting behavior, if you ask me. Anybody that says at this point that, well, deaths in the last 7 days, we're down to 2,600, but remember, deaths lag behind cases, and we only got 3,700 new cases in yesterday. So I mean, that's good. We got 111 deaths. I don't know if that's data as of June 1st. 111 deaths today from COVID-19. Out of a society with millions, hundreds of millions of people, you're probably more likely to die while you're listening to this podcast. So I mean, we're at the end of this thing. With that grocery store, I basically wrote their customer service and said, well, I mean, there's tons of other businesses here that aren't doing this anymore. The city doesn't mandate it anymore, and the city of Altoona didn't mandate it anymore. And not only that, but here was the kicker. I counted 7 employees in there during my visit that weren't wearing their mask. They just weren't wearing it. So, and I pointed that out to this employee that threw me out. I was like, your own employees aren't following this policy. It's one thing to say, well, we're a private business, we can do what we want. Well, it's a different thing to say, well, you have to follow this policy, but we don't. Well, what makes you special? So I wrote about that, and what do you know, 2 days later, I don't know if it was me or not, or if it was coincidence, but 2 days later, all of a sudden the mask mandate disappears there. It's gone. People are tired of living this way, and I think we're at the end of lockdowns and quarantine and all this nonsense. Thank God it didn't take hold too bad. Look at that, Wyoming is clear. 6 deaths in the last 7 days. 0 new deaths today. They're almost done. Let's take a look at Wisconsin. 26 deaths today, 107 in the last 7 days. So I mean, here in Wisconsin, we're pretty much finished. We lost 7,800 lives compared to the rest of the country. Some other places we made out pretty well, I would say, all things considering. Thank goodness for that. It definitely could have been much worse. Your total deaths per 100K is 134. Look at California. It's 156. They lost 62,000 people. They had 0 new deaths today. Yet I believe California is still under full lockdown. So, here we are where we're kind of doing whatever we want. 26 deaths today. California, 0 deaths today. Their deaths per 100,000 is actually higher than us. For every 100,000 people they have, they lose more people than we do. And we were in a hardcore lockdown state, not compared to them. They were one of the worst in the country. You look at Florida down here, 0 new deaths. The media was all over Florida saying, they were calling the governor there DeSantis. They were calling him Death Santis. Well, 36,000 deaths. But here's the kicker. Florida has the second oldest population in the United States. I think only Maine has an older population than Florida. They're at 171 deaths per 100,000. California is at 156. But they have less actual deaths, probably a lower population. I'm almost positive of that. But they're also at 0 deaths now. You look at New York, excluding New York City, they did pretty poorly. 178. And then in New York City itself, it was a disaster. 395 deaths per 100,000. That's pretty tragic. It's pretty bad. Yet 10 new deaths in the whole state over the last today. They're at the end too. Where's New Jersey? Where is New Jersey? There's New Jersey. New Jersey has the worst as a state deaths per 100,000 in the entire country. They did not do well at all. Here you got North Dakota and South Dakota. This is a pretty interesting thing to look at because they did very similar in deaths per 100,000, and one of them was a full lockdown state, just shut it all down, and the other said keep it all open, and they had nearly identical results. That's yeah. I don't think we accomplished a lot with these mass lockdowns. We didn't accomplish too terribly much. There'll be other epidemics in the future, and I really hope that the leaders, when that time comes, that they learn something from this. Granted, not all diseases are the same, but hopefully people don't do things that are unnecessary, that don't work in the future. And hopefully today you can feel completely justified and empowered in going back to normal. When you have the president of the United States saying that anyone who thinks we're ready to go back to normal is a Neanderthal, and that they maybe by 4th of July you'll be allowed to have like 3 people over and cook in the backyard. I don't need your permission. I'm going to follow what the CDC is saying here. That's what I'm going to do. So we went a little bit off base there, but you know what? That was fine. I should have talked about this quite some time ago, and I'm glad we got to sit down and talk about that. I mean, you can basically, you saw the graph for yourself. This thing's at the end. Between that and the vaccine numbers, they're almost 300 million issued. There you go. That's we're at the end. So, if you've been living in fear and terror for the past year and a half, you can finally breathe. So, anyhow, I am going to read that Georgia bill over the next week, or I'm sorry, not Georgia bill. I already read the Georgia bill. What am I saying? I am going to read the Texas bill, and I'm going to compare it to what the media has to say, and we're going to look at it, and it's probably going to be pretty entertaining. Like I say, I have no idea what's in that bill right now aside from the first 30 pages. So, for all I know, I could be coming forward to you next week going, I was wrong. This bill's horrible. That's possible. I'm not afraid to do that if that's the case. I mean, I'll tell you this much: if I find something in there that is blatantly, racist or bad for the public, I'm going to share my screen with you just like I did here, and you'll get to see it yourself. I will absolutely do that because it's important, and it's important in this age where you can't trust anybody because everybody wants to lie to you and sell you stories and narratives that just aren't true. If you're one of the handful of people watching this, I would assume it's because you're like me and you're interested in what is actually true. You want to follow the truth regardless of where it leads you. That's how I ended up where I am today. I don't care about partisan BS, or I don't care about a lot of politics are treated like a team sport, as if it's I don't know, as if it's Lakers versus Celtics, or Los Angeles Kings versus Ducks, Packers versus Vikings. I don't care about any of that. I care about what's true, and I'll follow that wherever it takes me, and then I'll share that with you. No matter where we end up. So, anyways, yeah, tune in next week. If you haven't already, if you're listening on Hometown Radio, I threw in a link to my actual YouTube channel in the description here. Please subscribe to that. That helps me out a ton. And yeah, just stay posted. Again, every Wednesday morning this will be released. So, well, that's all. I am going to go have myself a glass of wine and go to bed. Thanks for watching. Till next time.